Thank you for coming. The topic obviously is imminently Pesach is upon us, and the topic here tonight, I thought that I would give you a little bit of a taste of Maharal. And the Maharal, for someone that hasn't been acquainted with the Maharal's works are tremendous. I want to give a little bit of an introduction to the Maharal before we go on. I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint over here, and hopefully this will work. So let me give a short introduction about the Maharal, and hopefully that it will still have enough time. I wanted to give more on the Haggadah, but I realized each piece of Maharal takes so much explanation that it's really not can't really do justice. I thought I'd do a few pieces, but we'll see what we could do over here. So the Maharal lived in mostly in the 1500s. The Maharal, who is probably most famous if you've heard of his golem story, the story of the Maharal creating a golem, which is not a true story. Which I'm sorry to break it to people that despite the fact that there's a statue in Prague and people have heard stories about people going up to attics, it is not a true story. The interesting thing about it is that he was so great and he was so familiar with all bodies of knowledge, particularly Kabbalah, that people actually believe it. I mean, if there's somebody that it could have happened to, probably to the Maharal, but it's still not a true story. So the Maharal, he's a prolific writer. He wrote and wrote. Each one of his works are just so filled with information, and he goes on and on. Like if a person has learned Rashi on Chumash or any kind of the medieval commentaries, they're very, very curt, very, very crisp in their words. Each letter is weighed. Maharal writes, and he explains himself again and again in different terminologies, but his works are very, very deep. And I want to point out here, I think a little bit of an introduction about what makes his work special will give us a lot of flavor through what we're going to say here on the Haggadah. And the question is now how I get to the next screen if I took off the navigator. So we'll just go here. So there are 3 points. There's a lot that can be said about the Maharal's Torah, but there are 3 points specifically that need to be understood in what the Maharal gives over. The first point is Kabbalah. Now, what we need to know about Kabbalah, everyone knows Kabbalah it's translated loosely as mysticism, Jewish mysticism. It dates back to the giving of the Torah itself. It's a layer of depth in the Torah that is definitely a tremendously deep, as a matter of fact, probably infinitely deep layer of Torah. In the medieval commentaries, they did not use the word Kabbalah. And I'm saying this for a reason, because it will really help us understand what the Maharal is trying to accomplish with his niche in Torah. They call Kabbalah Chachmas ha'emes, the truth of the wisdom of truth. Now, that needs to be understood for a minute in order for us to really see where this goes. The implication would seem to be that if you're calling Kabbalah, which is spelled here wrong thanks to spell checker. If you're calling Kabbalah, Chachmas ha'emes, the true wisdom, the implication would be, and if everybody could just mute yourself unless you want to talk. I don't know how to mute everybody, although I probably do, but mute. I don't know, just everybody mute themselves. So the implication seems to be that the other areas of Torah are not true, right? This is the true wisdom, and the other areas are not true. It is far from the case. And this is what we need to understand. When the Torah uses the word true, for example, you'll find all over the words of the Torah, we refer to it says Hashem's sign is truth. Hashem's stamp is truth. What does that mean? We don't mean to say that, well, he'll keep his word. That's not such a tremendous praise. I'd expect my 10-year-old to keep his word, my 8-year-old to keep his word. Whether they do or they don't, that's another story. But I expect them to keep their word. I certainly expect my friends and my spouse to keep their word. To say that God keeps his word, I mean, that's not such a tremendous praise. We need to understand first what we mean by truth. When the Torah refers to true, or let's actually start. When we refer to truth, what we mean specifically is that my words, my heart, and my mind are all in unison. The words that are coming out of my mouth, my heart, what I'm thinking, my heart, what I'm feeling, and what I'm thinking in my head, all of those are in unison, and that is what you're going to get. What you see is exactly, what you hear in this case was exactly what I'm thinking, and it's exactly what I want. That is called truth. Everything is in unison. And conversely, if a person is lying, they're saying one thing, but in the inner core, they mean something totally different. They're absolutely not thinking about what they're saying. When we talk about truth, we mean something that is consistent throughout. It has complete consistency. So when we say, for example, Hashem's stamp is a stamp, his stamp is a stamp of truth. That means that when you find what you find about Hashem, the essence of Hashem will be found in creation, from the most physical aspect and minute aspect of creation to the biggest, most metaphysical, spiritual aspect of creation. That truth, that Hashem's presence, will be found throughout. It will pierce through the entirety of creation. So when we talk about Kabbalah, when we talk about Chachmas HaEmes, we talk about it's the true wisdom. It's the wisdom that looks to find the threads throughout creation. It looks to find create in the physical, metaphysical, I shouldn't say creation, reality. It looks to find the threads that string through the entirety of reality. Now, if I were to give I would kind of say it as it looks like it's almost like the math of reality. We'll speak about this more because we're going to use this idea as we go on into one of the pieces that the Maharal we're going to see. I want to say another idea. So one thing about the Maharal is basing his Torah on Kabbalah. He uses Kabbalah, even though he doesn't speak the words of Kabbalah so much. I mean, I shouldn't say so much. He writes so much, but he speaks relative to the amount he writes. The amount of Kabbalah he says is, or the syntax of Kabbalah is relatively not so much. However, everything is coming in line, it's jiving with, if not branching out of Kabbalah. So we have a real dependency on the words that he's saying are not things that he dreamed up in the middle of the night. Hey, this sounds like a great idea. Number two, his works are very dependent on patterns of words and numbers. He has a way of the early works of Kabbalah, things that predate the Arizal. The Arizal was actually post the Maharal. The Arizal's works were not available at the time the Maharal was alive. The Arizal, I'm not even sure they crossed, maybe by a year or something. They crossed very, very little. But no. It's possible that they crossed, but the Maharal did not have access to that Arizal's Torah. But things like the Zohar and the Sefer Yetzirah and other things like that he bases his Torah on, it's very, very into utilizing numbers. Now he uses it often backwards, and I want to explain that for a second. Let's take an example. If I were to mention the name, let's say Joe Biden and Mark Zuckerberg and I don't know, the guy that owns the dispensary around the corner from my house. So we would say, like, what do these three have in common? If I would ask you, well, what is the common denominator? What's the tri-bond of these three? I might have a hard time trying to figure out the tri-bond. Well, they're all human. I mean, they're all like the common denominator of the three of them is that they're all in charge. They're all the number one. So I would expect that anyone who is in a position of being number one in whatever strata he exists in, if I would expect that he's going to have certain qualities. He's going to have people under him, for example. If you're a number one and there's no number two, it's not, but he would have decisions. He had certain decisions. He would that rest on his shoulders. He would have certain responsibility. That will be consistent through all of the people that we would categorize as number one. So therefore, if you were to tell me anybody else, oh yeah, he's the number one, I would be able to relatively, despite whatever strata of knowledge you put him at, or whatever industry you put him in, I would pretty much be able to suggest he probably has quality X, Y, and Z, even though I don't know what he's selling or what he's doing. So similarly, when numbers exist in the Torah, the Maharal uses them often as doorways to understanding. And again, this is actually something that exists very much in the Sefer Yetzirah, but it's not really the topic of this. if you see a number 1, the Maharal will immediately say, hey, look, if I see a 1, I know that means, that means a unity. It means a beginning. Number 2 would mean duality, obviously. 3 is synthesis. 4, he has a whole different framework. 10, how 10 is as a complete unit. 6 as 4, 6. If there's anybody who's familiar with the Torah, you'll find we all know there are certain numbers that come up often. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you have mostly 7, 10. You have these numbers that come up very, very often. And the Maharal likes to deal with these numbers. So he will often take the number and say, once I understand the number, I know we're talking about a CEO. So now we can start to break down from that. That's another pattern you're going to find very, very much in the Maharal. I'm going to see it in this piece today. And the third thing you have to know about the Maharal, and this is probably the most prominent, the most salient thing you'll find about the Maharal, he looked at his job in the world as not to introduce Kabbalah to the world. He doesn't seem to be what he's very interested in doing, is to show people that the words of the Midrash, the words of the Gemara, are not to be taken lightly. They have tremendous, tremendous depth, and he defends it. He brings it out. He fleshes out every point. He fleshes out every point of those words, and he'll in its entirety, one little, piece of medrash that sounds bizarre. It sounds like totally off the wall. He will take it and show you why did they use the number 6 in there, and why does it have to be a person? Why does it have to be this? And I'll ask all the questions and flesh out all the various patterns and weave it together with tremendous depth. Once you've seen it that way, you can never see it another way again. I can promise. Once you've seen the way the Maharal looks at a medrash, he's innovative. No one really looked at it that way before, took it and wrung it out for every single detail. The Maharal was absolutely tremendously innovative in doing that. We will see, God willing, we'll see his tying, how Kabbalah pierces through everything, the numbers and patterns and words, letters, how he uses it, and we'll see the incredible depth of the sages through this piece. So let's do a quick, very, very quick introduction to the Seder night. There are 5 mitzvahs on the Seder night. We are right now going to discuss 2. There are 3 others that are rabbinic. There are 2 that are biblical. The 2 mitzvahs that are biblical are eating matzah and relating the story of the Exodus in Egypt. Those are the 2 biblical mitzvahs. The other 3, drinking the 4 cups of wine, eating mar, reciting Haggadah, they're rabbinic. Although if we had a Beit HaMikdash, God willing, this year, if we have a Beit HaMikdash, which, gosh, if the Beit HaMikdash gets built, are they going to lighten up all the COVID restrictions? I don't know, it's a good question. But either way, if we had a Beit HaMikdash, then Mar would also be biblical. But Mar is only biblical with a Pesach offering. In any case, we're going to focus this evening, we're going to focus on these 2 mitzvahs of eating matzah. Our piece that we're going to bring from the Maharal is going to focus on eating matzah and how that ties in to relating the story of Egypt. We're going to start with this piece of the Haggadah. This piece of the Haggadah, rather. Sorry. And let's take a quick look. At the very beginning of the Haggadah, what would be, it's not the very beginning of the Haggadah, the very beginning of Magid. Now, if you know the steps of the Haggadah, you have Kadesh, Norchatz, Karpas, Yachatz. Magid is where we begin the story of relating the story of the Exodus. Magid, which is the part that kind of people start to just go through, okay, when do we eat? Magid is probably the core of the whole thing. If you're gonna speed through anything fast, Mag is really not the one you want to go through fast. Maybe eat a little faster, or wash your hands fast, or only one person can say Kiddush. Mag is really it's really where the mitzvah is done. And as a matter of fact, I have a class on this tomorrow, going through as a Haggadah primer. You're all welcome to join me tomorrow for my class. But there are parts of Magid that are really, those are also peripheral parts, and unfortunately, those are the parts that most people focus on, the 4 sons, and then But the essential mitzvah of the evening is to relate the Exodus to the best of one's ability. So at the very beginning of Magid, we start to talk about, this is the very, very beginning, we start to talk about the matzah, and we say halach ma'anya. This is the bread of our ancestors. Now, I'm not going to see the Maharal inside. I'm going to kind of rearrange his words and give you over the ideas that the Maharal says in a way that kind of builds through a consistent pattern. The Maharal begins with the following question. He says, number 1, this is the way it translated here, is this is the bread of our destitution. It's the bread of our poverty, whatever it is. It's poor man's bread. See, he says, what about the bread is it makes it a poor man's bread. Everybody knows the joke that if you were paying $30 a pound for flour and water, you would also call it poor man's bread, or whatever the number is. As a matter of fact, you should know the Hamatz is in like New York area. My brother told me it's like $60 a pound. Like it's like just an insane number. Thank God I am going to New York this year, God willing, and thank God someone else is going to be paying for it. So poor man's bread. Okay, So we also might say, well, that's what you give to a person who is poor. So it says here that this is the poor man's bread that our ancestors in Egypt. The Maharal wants to understand what aspect of bread, what aspect of matzah makes it a poor man's bread, the bread of poverty. Number two, all of us, I just brought it in Kiddush over here, but all of us are really familiar with the idea that Pesach is looked at as the Yom Tov. It's looked at as the holiday of our freedom. We're commemorating the freedom, as it says over here. You gave us the festival of the matzahs, Matzot. That's great. So, by the way, this is the Maxwell House Haggadah. It's amazing that Maxwell House has a Haggadah, right? Like, why would Maxwell House have a Haggadah? It's actually like a really interesting thing. It was all a marketing thing. It's not like Maxwell House is owned by a Jew, I don't think, at least. It was all a marketing thing in order to get Jews to buy Maxwell House on Pesach. It had to do with some controversy that people used to think coffee was kitniyot. So when it came out that it wasn't, Maxwell House realized that they jumped on the idea, and now it's the most printed Haggadah ever in America. So I forget they come out with another one. So matzahs, it's the season of our freedom. It's the holiday of our freedom. Maharal asks another question. He says, if this is the season where we're celebrating freedom, so what does poverty have to do with freedom? Why would I eat matzah, the bread of poverty, on a holiday where I am celebrating freedom? Now, we kind of intuitively think, well, a person who is a slave is probably poor, and therefore poverty, it makes sense because we talk first about our slavery before we talk about our exodus. So therefore, okay, but poverty, even if you wanted to say that it's the bread of, even that the matzah is coming as a function of the slavery, even if you wanted to say such a thing, that's slavery. That doesn't mean poverty. Poverty is not the antithesis of freedom. Those are not opposites. Subjugation is a person can be in a very, very, very wealthy environment and be a slave there. So he asked the question: what does poverty have to do at all with freedom? If it's the holiday of freedom. So we'll get back to the answers. Let's go on to just flesh out some of the questions that he says. The Torah and the Haggadah makes it. I brought it from the verse in the Torah for you. Number 3, I brought a verse in the Torah for you. The Torah makes a very strong point of telling us that the Jews left in a hurry. The Haggadah does the same thing. The Haggadah points it out also. The Jews had to get out now. There was no dilly-dallying, just get out. As a matter of fact, the Midrashim are like replete. Paro woke up in the middle of the night and he was knocking on doors. Just get out. Where's Moshe? Get out, get out, get out. There's no delaying. Just get out. As a matter of fact, and it says that that's why they had unleavened bread, because they had to get out. That in itself is tremendous questions, because you'll find that and if you read the verses, that they were commanded to make matzah for days before. What do you mean that it was because they had to get out quickly? They knew about matzah for 2 weeks already. But in any case, the Maharal also asked the following question. He asks, what's up with the hurry? Like, why is they're so frazzled to leave? Why is there this? They've been in subjugation 400 years, 210 years, depending how you count. Let's say 210 years. They've been in Egypt for 210 years, and they can't wait another minute. No, that's it. Like, and you want to say, oh, that's Hashem's promise. Okay, but he promised it's going to be at the crack of dawn. Okay, a few hours wouldn't make a difference. Another day, it's still 210 years. But no, it had to be now. The Maharal is very concerned with this question, and we'll see a tremendous point in all this. And just one last question. The Torah, and here we'll come to the Maharal's numbers, and actually he's going to use this number is one of the ways that he opens a crack at the door to find his answers. The Torah puts the Pesach in the first month of the Torah. Now, this might be confusing to people that are not so aware of the Torah system of counting. Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the Jewish New Year, which we would think would be at month 1, is counterintuitively, it was just in a bizarre way, it's in month 7. The first month of the Jewish New Year is Nisan, from the Torah's perspective. The first month of the year, the first month of the months is Nisan. We count that at the beginning, and the Torah says now at Nisan, that is where the Geula had to happen. That is where the redemption had to happen. Now, very, very Maharal kind of Torah. The Maharal is always concerned why is Chanukah in Kislev, and why is Purim in Adar. He's very, very concerned why each thing is in each month and what the number of that month is. This is very, very much up the Maharal's alley. But specifically over here, it's very, very bolate. It's very, very, it stands out tremendously. The Torah, as a matter of fact, I brought over here in number 5, the first Rashi in the entire Torah. Rashi asks, what is Bereshis doing here? The whole book of Bereshis, the one that most of us are interested in, where like when you're kind of doing your, if you're a person that follows the weekly parasha, everybody's like strong in Bereshis. And the first couple of Exodus, the first couple of Shemot, everybody's like, okay, like I'm still keeping up. And then like halfway through Shemot, like people start to like peter out. It's like, oh man, so it's like another garment of the Kohen. Oh, wow, fantastic. Oh, there's like, wow, more wood, more wood building walls. Fantastic. And then you get into like, oh, all right, more offerings and more offerings and more offerings and more. Oh, okay, great. And then we're going to talk about saras, leprosy, and again and again and again and again. And it's like, and then it's followed by the disaster, one disaster after the other of the Jewish people. And we close the book and we say, New York Times bestseller for all of eternity. But everybody is very into Bereshit. The first Rashi in the entire Torah, Rashi says Bereshit, the most interesting book probably of the 5, the one that really draws our interest and we want to know the most about. Rashi says it should not have been there. Technically speaking, it should not be in the Torah, not because it's not divine. Oh, it's very, very divine. That's not the issue. He says it doesn't really jive with the reason of the Torah. Rashi over here, I brought it over here. He says it was not necessary for the Torah to begin except from this mitzvah, the first month of the year, the first month of Nisan, the mitzvah where Hashem starts to say, where Moshe introduces to the Jewish people, we're going to celebrate Pesach, we're going out of Mitzrayim, this is month 1. From there, that should be where the Torah begins. And the Maharal says, why is it specifically that the Torah has that rather Pesach, the Geula, the month of our redemption, why does that have to be in month 1? Why in month 1? Now, just to sum up some of the questions that we have just said. So, by the way, if you see me moving my mouse around, it's just if you haven't been used to giving a Zoom thing, it's because all of your faces aren't always blocking my screen because my second screen didn't work. Okay, so number 1, the first question, what exactly do we mean when we call it the bread of poverty? The second question, what's the connection between poverty and a night where we're celebrating freedom? If it wouldn't be that he's such an anti-Semite, I would do my Braveheart imitation, but it's lost its just the same, it's lost its pizzazz with me, just like Pink Floyd is. Number 3, why did the redemption need to be in haste? Why did it have to be? The Torah makes a specific emphasis. Oh, it had to happen, boom, right away. And number 4, what's the significance of putting Pesach in the first month? Now, the Maharal, what he does, typical Maharal, is he shows, he answers it multiple ways. He gives one answer to answer all 4 questions, and then he gives another. Sometimes, if you do the Maharal and Pirkei Avos, he'll give like 7, 8 answers to something, but a person, he expects a person who is astute to it, a person who's intelligent, a person who wants to think it through, that every single answer is complementing the other answer and just digging down slightly deeper, and slightly deeper. So the Maharal begins with the first answer, and this answer is a tremendous idea that we can really take home, much more than the second answer. The second answer calls potentially on Kabbalah a little bit more. The first answer is a tremendous idea that we can take home. I brought this just as a source. I mean, I could have just brought it because it was just I Googled and it was a fun source, whatever, just something I could throw on. The Maharal says, what does it mean, dealing with that first question, which is, why is it called the bread of poverty? Why is matzah considered a bread of poverty? What about it is poor? So the Maharal explains with its contrast. In halacha, we have something called matzah ashira. Now, Ashkenaz, I believe Sephardim will be a little bit more. They're a little bit more lax on matzah ashira, on what we call, I guess egg matzah. But it's not really egg matzah. It's like rich matzah. Ashira means osher is rich, and lachem oni is poor. So rich matzah. Any matzah that is that in its baking process includes fruit juice, honey, eggs, basically anything that has taste. Any matzah that includes those things, Ashkenazim do not eat it. We certainly will not. We would not use it for a mitzvah. We certainly can't use it for the mitzvah of matzah. There is a debate if it's really prohibited or it's a custom, whatever it is. So for people that have an issue with eating matzah for all 7 days of Pesach, or 8 days, whatever, depending where you are. So if a person has an issue, so we do allow it for sick people or elderly people, or for somebody who really for some reason they have this issue. But there are certain leniencies, but in general we stay away from it. And you certainly cannot use it for the mitzvah of matzah. Use it at the Seder. You have not fulfilled your obligation of matzah. The Maharal jumps on the fact that it's called matzah ashira. It's called a rich man's matzah, a rich matzah. So what about that is rich compared to lachem oni, compared to matzah, which is poor? So he says the following idea, and this idea is just, it really gives us a tremendous insight. He uses this idea to weave through all the questions with tremendous insight. He says that we tend to think as lechem oni, poor bread, the bread of poverty. We tend to think of it with an imagery of a person who has very, very little, and they're destitute, they're desperate. They'll just eat this because they have nothing else to eat. And that's not the case. That's not the reason, or that's not the dimension that the Torah is trying to focus on when it tells you to eat matzah. He says what we're referring to by matzah being the bread of poverty, we're referring to it being very, very simple. It's very, very simple. It's stripped down to its essence. That is what makes matzah considered lechem oni. There's nothing else. It isn't depending on anything else. There's nothing else giving it taste, and there's nothing else. As a matter of fact, chametz is matzah ashira could potentially be Sephardim hold that is permitted. Chametz takes it injects another entity, an outside yeast, an outside ingredient, in order to just alter the entire structure of the bread and the water together. So, and that we stay away from entirely. That it's in the root of what it is, as opposed to, for example, if we coat it with honey, when we put it in, we give it flavoring. So you still say, okay, it's bread and water with a little flavoring. But when we put in chametz, we've actually altered the whole molecular structure of what it is. That we entirely stay away from it. It says matzah is something, it's poor, not to mean that it's destitute, but that it's independent, it's self-sufficient, it's simple. It doesn't depend on anything else. It is just gone down to the essence, and nothing else is giving it its flavor. And with that, the Maharal begins to weave through the questions. And the Maharal says the following, and this is such an incredible idea when you take this through. This is the theme, even though the Maharal is going to go to another answer, which really, really enters into an understanding of the world of Kabbalah. But this really, really is the theme of the Pesach Seder. People have this tendency to think, that, free we're free. We could do what we want, or let's say related to living in America. Like we have, we're in a free country and we have the ability to do what we want. And back then, in the times of in the old days, in the really old days, although my kids probably think that, my parents came out of Mitzrayim and my kids always are asking me things like, what was their color? I remember asking that to my parents, but like, no, was there color when you were a kid? In any case, but either way, but in the old days, like we kind of think, oh, that was like servitude, and now we're free. That's not the Torah's idea of freedom. That's not what the Torah means, and that's not what we're talking about at all. The Maharal explains the following: freedom means self-sufficient, independent. A person who's free, a person that doesn't depend on anything, is a person who is experiencing chayvus. Let's take an example, because it's not always very, very easy to understand where it breaks down, and a lot of it is subjective. There's an example that one of my rabbis give, one of my teachers who I learned from, but it works. Let's take a person who has a car. Is the car for that person considered a tool, or does the car inhibit that person's freedom? Let's explain. If you have a person that can walk, no problem, can walk 5 miles to work every day, no problem. They walk, and it's a simple stroll, and they don't have any problem with it. So one day it turns out they have to go to a store, or they have to go somewhere that's 10 miles away. So they need a car. So their ability is to be able to walk 5 miles. And they need a car as a tool to be able to extend their own ability. That car takes the person and extends the boundary of the person, if you could see that. But let's put that in contrast to a person who could walk 5 miles, gets a car, and now they can no longer walk 5 miles. So the car for that person has subjugated the person to the car. The car has now taken the person and said, you belong to me. You can no longer work with, you can't function without me. This is a very common thing in luxuries, addictions. If a person's in a state where they can function, they don't need anything. I'm self-sufficient. I don't need anything to perpetuate my own existence and my own abilities. That would be considered freedom. But if a person, for some reason, if a person is dependent on something, for whatever it is, if a person is dependent on it, that person is in chains. They're in shackles because they can't function without it. And obviously, there's different dimensions and different places where this plays itself out. But that is the Torah's idea of freedom. A person who has, or freedom is the characteristic of being self-sufficient, of not being dependent. So the Maharal says the following idea, and he says you should know that the reason why they were eating matzah, the reason why matzah was what they ate in Mitzrayim, the bread of poverty, is because matzah is because not that they were experiencing, they were free. It's not because the Torah was telling them to go. It wasn't indicative of the process of them being free, because you have a person who's free and they have lots of luxuries. That's not like, we wouldn't say, oh, matzah there. That's indicative of a person who's free. No, it's discussing the process. It's showing you the process, the transition towards freedom. A person who's going towards freedom strips away the unnecessary in order to be self-sufficient. I don't need that. I don't need whatever it is. I don't need a cigarette. I don't need, and by the way, that's, I brought over here, there's a saying of this, in Pirkei Avot, there's a saying of the sages, Rabbi Yoshua, the son of Levi, said, there is no free individual except those who occupy themselves with the study of Torah. Now, if you were to pick like one thing, and say, oh, what's my epitome of freedom? Like, what's a person who's free? I doubt that most people would say, oh yeah, very religious Jews or people that study Torah and are very adherent to all the laws. They're free, man. That's the good life. Most people wouldn't exactly think that just because, well, look, I have 24 and a half, 25 hours where all my electronics go off. I disconnect. In this world, it's like by the time Shabbos is over, I have to worry about what happened to Bitcoin over the last 24 hours. Yeah, shout out to Akiva. But I have to worry about like, or I was a kid. Well, that was before cryptocurrency. So other things you worried about as a kid. I remember, gosh, for those of us remember when VCRs came out, right? VHS and the VCRs. Like, so we used to like the shows that we missed on Shabbos. It was painful. It was painful as a kid. We had to keep the TV off. When I was younger years, they used to keep it on, and then in my older years, they used to keep it off. And then we had a VCR came out, and we were like, oh my gosh, we tape everything. So we used to like, we need the tape that could go the longest, just like record the most, so we don't miss anything. And then we were like trying to figure out how to record multiple channels, and like, it was like, and it was like, so you want to look at that as freedom, and then you have, a marital laws, and you have kashrut laws. I can't eat any. That's freedom. So there is the Torah is telling you that a person who engages in Torah, that's what Pirkei Avos is saying, a person is going to be able to work on their character traits, to not need respect, honor, to not need luxury to function. You'll be able to learn to function without luxury, without people feeding you honor, without keeping up with the Joneses, whatever it is, that person will be free. The person will be free from addiction, will be free from being subservient to their own vices and their own instincts. So freedom. I have a beautiful quote that I saw somebody once quote, and I thought it was fantastic. Like this Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was a German theologian. He actually came against the Nazis and he was killed for it. He was Christian. He said the weak are always forced to decide between alternatives they haven't chosen themselves. Like that's being subjugated. Like I can't. This is what I have. Now, of course, the Torah also is giving you certain guidelines, but everything. There's no such thing as true freedom. If I was, and you can't say that. Well, if I'm not religious, I'm truly free. There's still certain things you cannot do. So here the Torah is going to allow you to escape what you in of yourself, what you could cause yourself to subject yourself. That's what the sages mean in Pirkei Avot. But getting back to the Haggadah, getting back to it, the Maharal says that becoming dependent, the process of moving towards freedom is a process of becoming independent, moving away from anything that would cause you to rely on something else for, in matzah, it's for taste or texture. It stands by itself. It's the process towards simplicity, and a process towards independence, I should say. And he says, therefore, that's why it had to happen b'chipazon. We go back to that question. Why did the redemption need to happen in haste? The Maharal says the following. He says a beautiful idea. He says when something occurs, when there's an occurrence that happens to a person and they need to decide what to do, that there's a delay. I say, hey, you want to go to the store with me? And I stop, and I say that to you, and you say, well, give me a second. Let me think. What that means is there are different factors that are pulling at me. It can't be immediate. It can't be impulsive, because I have to decide, will I be back in time? Do I want to spend that money on gas of the car? I mean, do I even have money to pay for whatever we want to go to do? I mean, will somebody be upset at me if I go? Whatever the factors, all those factors are pulling at me. So I'm subjugated. Had there been a delay, says the Maharal, had there been a delay in the Exodus, that means there's another factor in play. There was something else happening, and that would be in and of itself a contradiction to absolute independence. And he says that's why that's the significance that it happened in the first month. He says the number one, very, very typical Maharal Torah, the number one is the only number that is an independent number. You can have a number one because you have a number one, but you cannot have a number two unless you have a number one, right? One stands by itself. It doesn't need a two to follow it. It just is by itself. It's a number that indicates independence. So the Maharal says that is specifically why we have the holiday of Passover, the holiday of our freedom. It's all its details indicate the transition from being subjugated to something to being free from it. This is all the first level of the Maharal, and this is like kind of the first peel that he peels. But the Maharal says, I have to tell you more. And he revisits all the questions. Now, in order to do this, we'll take a quick introduction of Kabbalah. Although I do see there's a, I don't know if, okay, sorry. Okay. So in order to do this, we'll take a quick introduction of Kabbalah. When we talk about Kabbalah, as I said before, I said earlier, that Kabbalah is it's looking for the truth that weaves through the entire reality. So when you find something that's true in this world, it's going to be true in our reality. When you find something that's true, it's going to be true everywhere. If it has exceptions, it's not absolutely, it's true, but it's not really true. So for example, let's take a simple example. If a 90-degree angle, if I take something to say, well, there's a 90-degree angle, a 90-degree angle will be true in the architect that's building my house. It'll be true on a molecular level, and it'll be true on Mars, and it'll be true on Pluto. It doesn't make a difference where. A 90-degree angle, the way we identify, that's like a cosmic truth. 90 degrees, the way we define it, 90 degrees is 90 degrees. It's always 90 degrees. It doesn't matter where you are. The situation doesn't, yeah, I mean, the same way if we'd say 2 + 2 = 4, it doesn't make a difference if it's 2 oranges and 2 apples and 2 pieces and 2 pieces of pizza or 2 whatever. It doesn't make a difference. 2 + 2 will always equal 4. It's independent of its details. It's a truth. When we talk about Kabbalah, what we're looking to do is, as we're looking to go towards a reality that is the root of our reality, and find the root detail that is going to string through the entirety of existence. So let's look at it in contrast for a second of our world. Our world values something, our world values complexity. In what would be called Haggadah, hybrid. If we have a computer, if I have a circuit at a calculator, I remember, like, for those remember actual calculators that you can get like 11 spaces or 9 spaces, and you play with it as a kid, and you just did it again and again and again and again, and you're like, that was didn't really do much, but you still, like, every once in a while you pulled that and said, maybe I can get to do something else, So like that. But if you take a calculator and then you add another circuit next to it, and then you add another circuit next to it, and you add another, and you keep doing that and building, you get a supercomputer. That is, it's looked at as being more, it's looked at as being a better, it's something that's better. It's moving up on the totem pole, so to speak, right? It's moving towards something that's greater. That's the way our world functions. Our world functions with breaking things down and creating things out of the pieces that stack things together in order that they grow. You'll find that true if you have a wheel. So a wheel is a great thing. Look, it's better than a stone, right? In terms of having to move, in terms of that detail, it's better than a square. So a wheel turns, and if I have 2 wheels, it can balance itself. And if I have a platform that on top of the 2 wheels, and I can sit on it, and then if I have brakes, I have a car that's so much better than a wheel, and things keep growing and growing in that fashion, and things get better and better. That is not the case when we talk about the upper worlds. When we're in an explanation or an exploration rather of trying to find the root of something, we want simplicity. We look towards what is the switch that's making this thing? Where is it getting all of its nourishment from? What is the root idea? This is true, and again, this is true in our world also. I brought over here again, and this is something that I heard from one of my mentors. This is called Occam's razor, okay? And let's give it with the following idea. He said, this is what I heard from my mentor, but it used to be astronomers had a lot of problems. I don't know so much about astronomy, but I should say I know nothing about astronomy. That's probably more accurate. So they had a lot of problems trying to figure out the orbits at the, in Aristotle's time. They had a lot of problems trying to figure out the orbits, because there are all these different nuances about the way that the orbits and the planets and the stars tend to go in and out. And they came up with all these wild theories. And a heliocentric world, the introduction of the idea that the sun is at the center and everything's revolving around the sun, that answered every single one of those details. Now, the fact of the matter is, besides, of course, the fact that we have today, we can observe it, so to speak. We have the ability to observe it with whatever. whatever we have, telescopes or satellites or whatever it is, besides the fact that we can observe it, at the time when it was introduced, that stuck. Why did that stick? So it's called Occam's razor, which is the following, that everybody is going to gravitate to the most simple idea. It doesn't have to be true. There's nothing that says that this is more true than that. It could be that there's, the orbits are that way, and there's 1,000 different reasons why each planet goes the way it does. And really, there it's at the center. It's possible, but we all tend to gravitate towards a truth being something that is a unifying factor. Today, looking for the universal rule of everything. How does everything function? Whatever the string theory or whatever they're going to use, but they want one factor that unites everything. As a matter of fact, when we discuss Hashem, we're talking about again another disservice that modern America, or the modern world has given us is our ideas about what we mean in a lot of these religious concepts, a God being no different. We have a tendency to think, I would guess, maybe I'm superimposing my own ideas and you can tell me if you disagree, but we have a tendency to think it's like a guy up there or a girl up there or something up there that has got a really, really supercomputer or something. It really has got a great mind to keep up with every details. And then we wind up with the questions like, well, why does God care if I? Like, gosh, I mean, so many details. Why are you worrying about the fact that I, did this or did that? Like, really? You're nitpicking? Like, so we have a wrong, at the core, we have a mistake in what we mean by God. God is the ultimate unifier of everything. When all of reality comes to a point, when all of the fabric that weaves all of reality together, science could call it one thing. We might agree that we agree that there's a unifier. We happen to call that unifier Hashem. That is the fabric of reality. That it's the very, very fabric. That's why the questions of existence and questions like why does it work? You can't ask questions. It doesn't make any sense. Like to ask a question like why does God care if? Well, why does reality care if this happens? Because that's reality is reality. I mean, it's almost if you can imagine someone in your dream turning to you and saying, why do you care that I'm doing this in the dream? Like, because I'm dreaming you. What do I care? Because I'm lying in bed and thinking about you and you're causing me anxiety. Like, that's why I'm worried about it. I'm the one giving you existence. You can't turn back to me that I am the house, I'm housing your existence. God is the ultimate unifier of everything. And therefore, when we look at Kabbalah, and as a matter of fact, in time, when we talk about the world to come, we're talking about a unity of everything. We're talking about an absolute unity of everything. For people that have studied Ramchal with me, might probably sounds very, very, very familiar. But when we're in the process of Kabbalah, of learning Kabbalah, we're looking for the patterns that unify everything. So you talk about, for example, for those who are advanced a little bit in this, talk about 10 sfirot. It's like the periodic table of reality. Just like, there are different elements, and the elements they mix and match in different ways. And I'm saying that very, very loosely with a very, very simplistic understanding, but you're discussing the science of reality. So, but it's looking for the trends. It's looking for the simple points that unify reality. The Maharal, this Gemara is brought by many, many places. If you look at this Gemara, it's a beautiful illustration about how the words of the sages look when you don't know what they're talking about. You're like, it's bizarre. It's like, just, well, what in the world is it? But once you start to understand the syntax they're using, understand the functions that they're calling, you have a totally different idea, a totally different view of what they're trying to give it over. Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi taught the two worlds that Hashem created. One world was created with the letter Hey, and the other was created with the Yud. The paragraph over here says, I didn't know which is which. And then he said, I realized that from this verse that this world is created with Hey, and the next world is created with Yud. And the reason why is because Yud is a single point. It is the smallest letter that has no parts. It's just, in its core definition, a Yud is just a point, and that's it. It's just one unified point, as opposed to a Hey, for whatever reason it's a Hey we're discussing, as opposed to a Hey which has to be drawn down, and then there has to be another leg which has to be broken up from that. Then it's complication. It's moving into complexity, where you have things that are interconnected. The Maharal says the following. He says, when we're traversing the the journey of trying to go from the physical to the spiritual world. We're moving from what's called pirud, from things that break things down, to moving to things that unite, things that come to the simplest point. See, he says, matzah is again, it's defined by its simplicity. The second things are introduced into matzah, the second you have chametz in there or anything else, it loses it starts to change its function. It's not even the same product. You can't even, it's possible you're not allowed to eat it, and it's not the same product that lachamoni is, that the bread of poverty is. It says matzah is the food, it's the food that a person, so to speak, ingesting the food of simplicity. A person is moving towards moving to a reality that's beyond them, to move towards something that is of the beyond. And he says, as a matter of fact, if you look over here, this is just a very nice add-on. He doesn't quote this, but these are verses in Malachim, in Kings. It's Kings 1, the book of Kings, where Elijah the prophet is approaching Hashem, and it starts to say, and when he approaches Hashem, there's earthquakes and there's loud, this splitting of mountains, and all this crazy, all this fire, and then it says, and after it, there's a soft murmuring sound, and that's where he finds Hashem. In a simplicity. Similarly, the Maharal does say the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, all year when he's functioning in the temple, all year he's wearing these incredible garments full of different beauty of gold and jewels. But on Yom Kippur, when he leaves, he goes into a place where he's never ever allowed to go to any other time but Yom Kippur. He, so to speak, leaves this world. Very simple. He wears white garments. You'd think that would be, he's really got to adorn himself then. White garments that are the simplest garments. So the Maharal points out the process of learning Kabbalah, the process of moving to the divine, the process of tapping into a reality that's beyond a reality is a process of moving towards simplicity, as opposed to our reality, which moves towards complexity. As a matter of fact, for a person who's astute to it, you'll see all the details of the Torah will follow this. You'll see that Adam HaRishon, that Adam was a single individual. Chava, it's two individuals, and then it became, and he had what? It starts off with 2 mitzvahs, la'avdu, l'shamra, to work the garden, whatever, to keep away from the tree, and then it became and then it started to move into more individuals, and it became 6 mitzvahs and 7 mitzvahs, and then into more individuals, and it comes 613 mitzvahs and a myriad of people. Everything starts to move and break down more and more and more. The Talmud itself is a book that breaks things into pieces and breaks it again and breaks it again and breaks it again until you like it splitting hairs in order to figure out what it's talking about. And you'll see Kabbalah goes the exact opposite way. It's a fascinating thing for anybody who's ever just studied any of this. The syntax, the buzzwords in the Talmud when it wants to tell you something, it says come in here, and the buzzword when in the Zohar, for example, when it wants to tell you something, it says come and see. So they point to the commentaries point out what's the difference between seeing and hearing. Hearing, a person can really only hear one thing at a time. Like if you hear there's a lot of stimulus, person really can't focus on hearing a bunch of things at a time. They can't hear it well. But seeing is worth 1,000 words. It's taking everything and combining it into one picture. I got it. I see it. I see everything at one time. So the Maharal says that the process of tapping in to a reality that's greater than ours is a process of going towards the simple, towards something that unites everything. And he says that's what matzah is. And he says therefore, to get back to our questions. Questions going in. He says, therefore, that's why it's called upon on the night of freedom. He says the freedom that happened on, if you notice, the freedom that happened on Pesach is so, the chayros that happened on Pesach is so different than any other chayros, any other freedom that we talk about. For example, let's look at the Purim story. The Purim story is multifaceted with a lot of human intervention. God's in the background, a lot of, kind of trying to figure out what's going, and it takes a turn there, and then it winds up with this big ending and an applause. And it's got a lot of twists and turns with human intervention, but the path of freedom of the Haggadah, you'll see that even in the Haggadah, it doesn't mention any other. It says lo ayidei shliach. God didn't even send. There was no messengers. God Himself came in, and from another world, for whatever, there was nothing calling it. There was no reason except Him wanting to take the Jewish people as His nation for whatever reason. On class for another time, and came in and just took care of the whole thing. It was one. It was a process from beyond. God forging the individuals that were the children of Israel into a Jewish nation, and that came from beyond. It came from and all the events, as opposed to, again, let's say the Megillah. All the events are very natural. The Haggadah, the process of Exodus, everything is supernatural. There's like nothing natural going on. And he says that's why it has to happen in haste. He says that that time is a function of this world. This is a class that I love to give, and I wish I had more time right now to do it, but I won't do it right now. But time is a function of this world. Anybody that's familiar with, familiar with even the beginnings of space time, or Einstein's theory of relativity, or time diffraction, and all those things. Like, time is a real thing that's in this world. It's a concrete dimension. It's not a convenience. It's a real thing, and it could change. I actually just saw an article that was posted. Somebody posted an article. They said, they theoretically came up with a model for a spaceship that could actually go the speed of light or potentially faster. I'll believe it when I see it. And then if somebody gives me some inside information, I would love to invest in such a thing. But in any case, either way, so that is time is a real function of this world. It's a real constraint in reality. It says it could not take time. It could not take time. As a matter of fact, a person that knows, the Aron in the Kodesh HaKodashim, in the Holies of Holies, the Ark did not have space. It didn't take space, whatever that means. The Exodus cannot take time, because time is a function of this world. Process, time, and process are things that occur only, in this world, and it cannot take time. And he says, and that's why it has to happen in the first of the month, because it's a beginning. One symbolizes not just an independence, but a complete reboot. There's nothing before one. There's no number before one. One indicates a reboot of the system. There is nothing else. It's, it says, as it says in Bereshis, for those who are familiar, it says in the Torah that it counts all the days of creation, the 7 days of creation. It counts 6 days and Shabbos on the seventh day. It counts them all incrementally. There's the second day, the third day, the fifth day, but it doesn't do that on the first day. The first day, it doesn't say this is the first. It says day one, and then it says second day, third day, fourth. If you're going to count it in that fashion, second, third, fourth, fifth, you don't say day one, you say first day, but it doesn't do that. It says day one because the commentators point out, because there was only a unity at that point. All that existed was one complete. There was nothing else. There was no duality. It says it's a beginning process. When something is having a new beginning, then that has to be at one. So let's see. So let's review some of the points before we stop, and then I'm happy to take any questions if anybody wants. The Maharal asked the 4 questions. Why is it the bread of poverty? And again, that's at the very beginning of Maggid. You'll see it over there. We talk about the bread of poverty that we ate in Mitzrayim. By the way, it says we ate it in Mitzrayim. It seems to indicate we ate it as slaves. That's not necessarily what it means. In fact, I doubt that's what it means. As a matter of fact, I'll commit to it. That's not what it means. They ate it in Mitzrayim the days before they were leaving. Hashem had told them, they ate it in Mitzrayim in process. They were in the process of making themselves into independence. So it doesn't say that they ate it necessarily when they were slaves. So the process of freedom, the Maharal asks, why is it called the bread of poverty? And what's the connection between poverty and freedom? Why did it have to happen in haste, and why the first month? The Maharal offers two different tracks. And again, they're really saying the same thing, just one at a slightly steeper level. On the first side, the process of freedom is poverty. It's poverty. It's not poverty as mean destitute. It's simplicity. It's because freedom means independent, moving to simplicity, becoming something that is not dependent on anything else for its existence. That's what the Torah defines as freedom. That is the freedom of the Torah. And any delay would indicate complexity. If there's a delay, that's why it has to happen in haste. If there'd be a delay, then it shows that there's other factors in play here. It's not simple. It's not so simple. I wanted to take you out, but look, hey, what do you call it? I don't know. Judge Wapner's on it at 7:30. We're going to have to wait. So that indicates complexity. and Judge Wapner. Anybody remember? I was thinking of Rain Man at the time, but whatever. I don't want to brand myself as like an 80s kid. So like, so in any case. So and number one, the number one shows it shows that it has no dependence because there's nothing before one. That's the beginning of the process. Two has a dependence on one. One doesn't depend on anything. That's one thread that the Maharal takes it. But another, and the second one, going a little bit deeper, he says, really, it's not just moving from simplicity, we're moving towards unity. Because the night, the freedom that happens on this night is one of another nature that didn't only forge individuals, that didn't only give us a taste of what it means to be free, meaning free in terms of not in a slave mentality where there are people on top of us, people that are calling this. I don't have the ability to decide right and wrong. Not in, I'm dependent on other things. Besides that, it's moving towards the spiritual. It's one that besides the individual, on the nation as a whole, was forging something that was a reboot. That was a reboot of the system to forge the Jewish nation. And that if it would take time, that would be a function of the earthly world, not of time, not of the metaphysical world, not of something that's beyond. And that's why it had to be a one, because one indicates a new existence. Two would have a dependency in this world. And that is the Maharal in a nutshell. As a matter of fact, if you were to read it, it would take longer than the hour that I just spent giving you this class. So I've just saved you so many hours of time. The least you can do is come clean my house for Pesach. If anybody has any questions at this point, before I do a mic drop, because this is like the worst part. Like if anybody gives classes, I'm like, sit there and like, okay, now what am I supposed to do? So if anybody has any, you can unmute yourself and ask anything you want about this or about anything else in the Haggadah, and I would be happy to fake an answer. And if not, I will wish you each good night. Now I will stand here awkward for 30 seconds.